He didn't leave a note. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't cheat, lie, or disappear in a dramatic storm of chaos. One morning, he simply stopped texting back. The apartment keys were quietly returned. The social media tags vanished. His presence faded like smoke. And just like that, he was gone. She still doesn't understand why. Friends told her he must have been a coward, that he didn't deserve her, that she dodged a bullet. But the truth gnawed at her. Quietly and constantly, everything had seemed fine. They laughed. They made plans. He kissed her on the forehead just 2 nights before. There were no signs, no red flags she could point to. So why did he walk away? What no one talks about is how often men leave, not in anger, but in silence. They don't always storm out. They slip away when they feel unseen, unheard, or quietly exhausted. While she was focused on whether he was ambitious enough, emotionally available, or masculine but soft, he was slowly drowning in the space between who he was and who he felt he needed to be for her. And when he realized he could no longer breathe, he didn't ask for oxygen. He just left. It's easy to assume he lacked maturity or empathy. But what if it wasn't about that? What if he had tried many times to express what was wrong, only to be met with defensiveness or dismissiveness? What if every "we need to talk" spiraled into lectures, ultimatums, or comparisons to imaginary men who would have done it all better? To her, his exit felt sudden. To him, it was the slowest decision he ever made. And maybe that's what stings the most, that he once saw forever with her, then woke up one day and realized forever didn't feel safe anymore. Not for his peace, not for his masculinity, not for the parts of him that no longer felt welcome in the relationship. He didn't want to be fixed. He wanted to be accepted. But by the time she noticed the distance in his eyes, he was already halfway out the door. She replayed every conversation in her mind, searching for a clue. Was it that night she criticized his job? That dinner where she talked over him without realizing? Maybe it was the way she rolled her eyes when he mentioned needing a break. But none of it felt big enough to break a bond. Yet to him, each moment chipped away at something fragile. They were both living inside a relationship built on 2 very different scripts. She was told men should lead, but also listen. That they should be strong, but vulnerable. Protective, but not possessive. Driven, but never too busy. She wanted balance, a man who challenged her, yet submitted when needed. She thought that was reasonable, empowered even. But what looked like empowerment to her sometimes felt like quiet emasculation to him. Every time he was corrected in public, every moment his effort was met with a suggestion for better. Every little test she thought was harmless. It added up. It wasn't that he couldn't handle a strong woman. He simply didn't feel like there was room for his kind of strength anymore. He was expected to provide, support, uplift, understand, grow, listen, and still remain composed under pressure. But when did anyone ask if he was okay? When did the relationship stop being a place he could rest and start becoming another job he had to perform? She had her checklist: financial stability, emotional intelligence, future goals, communication skills. He tried to be all of it, but with every box he ticked, he lost a piece of his authenticity. He wasn't sure if she loved him or the idea of who she thought he should be. She thought compromise meant getting her way, gently. He thought love meant becoming what she wanted. But no one ever asked what he needed. Not even him. The reality was simple. Her expectations weren't evil. His silence wasn't cruel. They were just 2 people walking in opposite directions, thinking they were still side by side. And when that illusion finally broke, it didn't explode. It simply faded, because unmet expectations don't always scream. Sometimes they whisper, and the whisper says, "This isn't working anymore." He wasn't raised to complain. He was taught to endure, to provide, to stay quiet and figure things out. So when things in the relationship started to feel off, he didn't shout. He analyzed, he adjusted, he absorbed, and with each adjustment he lost something: a laugh, a boundary, a piece of himself he didn't think she'd accept. He carried it well, so she never noticed. The little sacrifices, the constant filtering of his words to avoid conflict, the nights he stayed up replaying arguments, wondering how a single question turned into a courtroom. He learned to tiptoe around her moods, to stay agreeable, to say, "It's fine," when it wasn't. She mistook his calm for indifference. But really, it was exhaustion. He wanted to tell her. He wanted to say, "I feel invisible when you dismiss my opinions," or "I feel controlled when every decision becomes a debate." But those words stuck in his throat, because when he had tried, it became about how she felt attacked, so he stopped trying. He smiled more, talked less, faded slowly. He carried expectations he couldn't voice, that he must be a man, but not too much of one, that he must express emotions, but only the ones she was comfortable with, that he must lead, but never take control, that he must protect her peace, even if it cost him his own, and he bore the invisible pressure of never being allowed to struggle. When he felt lost about his future, she told him to figure it out. When he opened up about stress, she called it making excuses. When he said he needed space, she called it pulling away. So, eventually, he stopped showing up as himself. He gave her the edited version, the one that looked good in photos and family dinners. But inside, something was cracking. He never wanted her to fix him. He just wanted her to notice he was breaking. Not with pity, but with care. He wanted a partner, not a critic. A safe place, not a project. And when he realized that space didn't exist with her, not really, he began to plan his quiet escape, not because he stopped loving her, but because he realized he was no longer allowed to love himself within the walls of their relationship. The thought of leaving didn't come all at once. It arrived slowly, in waves, small realizations that built up over time. The first was when he found more peace alone than in her presence. The second, when he caught himself pretending to laugh. The third, when the silence between them no longer felt comfortable. It felt like a warning. He didn't want to go. In fact, he wanted to stay, to fix it, to try harder. But he had already tried, and trying harder for him only ever meant shrinking more. How do you fight for something that no longer has space for you? People say men walk away easily, that they're afraid of commitment. But what if commitment isn't the problem? What if staying in the wrong dynamic for too long is the real form of abandonment, of self, of boundaries, of sanity? He feared being labeled the villain, the one who gave up, the man who just disappeared. But the truth is, he left long after he started breaking. He stayed through moments where his pride told him to go. He stayed because he hoped she'd notice. She didn't. He waited for the conversation. The moment she'd say, "Are you okay?" and mean it, not as a setup for her defense, but as an invitation to his truth. But that moment never came. And over time, he stopped believing it ever would. So walking away wasn't an act of cruelty. It was a last resort. It was a quiet rebellion against the slow erosion of who he was. He wasn't angry when he left, just tired. Tired of being the only one holding the rope, of asking questions he wasn't allowed to ask, of solving problems alone in a relationship meant for two. He knew she would be confused. He knew she'd tell her friends she didn't see it coming. But how can you see anything clearly when you only look through your own lens? He didn't want revenge. He didn't want to prove a point. He just wanted peace. And in the end, he chose himself, not out of selfishness, but out of survival. Because sometimes leaving isn't about leaving her. It's about returning to him. She sat with the silence he left behind, trying to piece together a story that made sense. To her, he was the one who gave up, the one who couldn't handle a real relationship. She never saw herself as the problem. How could she? She was loving, ambitious, supportive, wasn't she? But love without understanding can still wound. Support without space can still suffocate. And ambition, when unbalanced, can crowd out connection. She thought she gave him everything. What she never realized is that he didn't want everything. He wanted something real, something simple, something safe. She asked the wrong questions. Not, "Why did he leave Sarbereal?" but, "What did I stop hearing?" Not what was wrong with him, but what was missing between us. Because the lesson wasn't in his exit. It was in the silence before it. The small signs, the repeated discomfort, the unmet needs that were never dramatic enough to demand attention, but powerful enough to destroy connection. Yet she never really looked back that far. Like many do, she focused only on the ending, not the slow unraveling that led to it, and so the pattern repeats. He was not the first man to leave quietly, and unless something changes, he won't be the last. Because we live in a culture that tells women they are always the prize, but never asks what they bring to the emotional table beyond being wanted. A culture where men are shamed for expressing pain and then blamed when they walk away from where their pain isn't heard. Some say he should have stayed and communicated better. Maybe. But how do you explain your hurt to someone who thinks they love you too much to be part of the problem? So he left, and in his absence, she searched for reasons. She listened to friends, to therapists, to timelines, but what she never did was truly sit with his perspective. To understand that leaving wasn't an attack, it was a boundary, not against her, but in defense of his own peace. And until that lesson is understood, not just heard, but felt, modern women will keep asking the same question. Why did he walk away? And they still won't see the answer standing quietly in the mirror.